There is something strange that happens when you spend time around a person who has truly awakened spiritually. Something you notice before you can explain it. They look younger than they should. Not younger the way cosmetics create the illusion of youth, but younger in a way that sits beneath the skin, in the eyes, in the way they hold their body, in the quality of their stillness. You look at them, and something in your mind quietly miscalculates their age. You assume late 30s and discover they are 52. You assume mid-40s and learn they are 61. And the strange part is that these are often people who have lived through enormous difficulty, loss, betrayal, health crisis, long periods of psychological suffering, more than the people around them who look years older. Carl Jung noticed this. He spent decades working with patients at every stage of psychological development, and among the things he documented was this quiet, persistent phenomenon. People who moved through genuine spiritual awakening carried a different quality of vitality in their physical appearance, not explained by genetics, not explained by lifestyle alone. Something more fundamental was happening. And when Jung traced it back to its source, what he found disturbs the comfortable story most people tell themselves about what aging is. Because most of us believe aging is simply time passing through the body. We believe wrinkles are years, that gray hair is experience, that the heaviness people carry in their face by middle age is just the natural price of living. But Jung's clinical observations pointed toward something entirely different. He believed that a significant portion of what we call aging is not time at all. It is accumulation. It is the weight of everything we refuse to feel, everything we carried for people who never asked us to, every version of ourselves we abandoned to survive, every truth we suppressed to keep peace in systems that were slowly consuming us. And the moment a person begins releasing that accumulation, something begins to reverse, not through some mystical fountain of youth, but through a real, measurable shift in how the nervous system operates, how the face holds tension, how the body moves when it is no longer bracing against its own truth. The spiritually awakened person looks younger because they have put down something enormous, something most people carry until the very end without ever realizing they were holding it. Before we understand what they put down, we need to understand what most people are carrying. Jung observed that the average person moves through adult life in a state of profound psychological compression, not because they chose it, but because the world around them required it from an early age. You learned quickly that certain emotions were acceptable and others were not. Certain versions of you were welcomed and praised. Other versions, the angry you, the frightened you, the deeply uncertain you, the you that simply wanted to stop performing, were quietly discouraged until they disappeared underground. Jung called what accumulated down there the shadow. Not evil, not dangerous in itself, simply everything the conscious mind refused to own, all the feelings that had nowhere safe to go, all the needs that were never allowed to be needs, all the grief that was interrupted before it could complete. And while the conscious mind carried on with ordinary life, the shadow grew heavier. Every year of not feeling what needed to be felt added weight. Not metaphorical weight, real neurological weight. The kind that changes how the muscles in your face hold, alters the quality of your breath, affects the hormonal environment inside your body in ways that accumulate across decades. Jung noticed that his patients who had not done this inner work carried it visibly. Not always in obvious ways, but in the set of their jaw, in the tension around their eyes, in the forward collapse of the shoulders that comes from years of bracing against an interior world that feels unsafe. Their bodies were doing something extraordinary and exhausting. They were working constantly to contain what had never been processed, to keep the lid on what had never been allowed to surface. And that containment, sustained across decades, leaves marks that no skincare routine touches. Because the marks are not on the surface, they are structural. They live in the nervous system, They live in the baseline cortisol the body maintains when a person is unconsciously at war with themselves. They live in the chronic, low-grade tension that becomes so familiar it stops feeling like tension and simply starts feeling like who you are. This is what most people are carrying by the time they reach their 40s and 50s. Not years, not experiences, but compressed, unresolved psychological weight. And here is where something important shifts. Because the spiritually awakened person, the one who stops people in their tracks with how young they appear, has typically lived through more difficulty, not less. Loss that broke them open, betrayal that shattered their assumptions about the world, periods of psychological darkness that lasted not weeks, but years. If anything, the events of their life would seem to justify looking older than their age. And yet, the opposite is true. Why? Jung's answer changes everything about what we think we understand about aging. He believed it is not the difficulty that ages a person. It is the resistance to difficulty. It is the suppression of what difficulty asks you to feel. The person who moves through genuine awakening has at some point stopped resisting. They have learned, often through enormous suffering, to feel what is actually there instead of managing what they don't want to be there. And that single shift from resistance to allowance, from suppression to integration, begins releasing the accumulated weight that was written onto the face, into the body, through the nervous system. The process is not comfortable. Jung was clear about this. Genuine spiritual awakening is not the peaceful, serene experience the wellness industry describes. It forces encounters with everything the person has been running from. The grief they never completed, the anger they never allowed without guilt, the shame that was assigned to them before they had any capacity to evaluate whether it belonged to them. This confrontation, which Jung placed at the center of what he called individuation, the lifelong process of becoming psychologically whole, is where the real reversal begins. Because when a person finally feels the grief they have been holding for 20 years, something releases. Not just emotionally, physiologically. The jaw unclenches that has been clenched so long the person stopped noticing. The breath drops deeper than it has in years. The muscles around the eyes, braced against unwanted perception, begin to soften. The nervous system, running a constant background program of containment and suppression, receives a signal it may have been waiting years for. Something is safe now. You don't have to hold this anymore. And what follows is something everyone around the awakening person notices before the awakening person understands it themselves. They begin to look different, not younger in a manufactured way, younger in a way that registers as fundamentally more alive. What the awakening person stops doing is performing. This sounds simple, but the weight of performance sustained across decades is something most people have never fully calculated. Consider how much energy goes into maintaining a version of yourself constructed to be acceptable, to be safe, to not threaten the comfort of the people around you. You learned early which parts of you were welcome and built a presentation, not dishonestly, but automatically, the way children build presentations when the alternative is rejection, abandonment, or punishment. Jung called this the persona, the mask that allows social life to function. There is nothing wrong with having one. The problem is what happens when the persona and the actual self diverge so far that the person has forgotten which one is real. Maintaining a version of yourself that doesn't match your interior reality requires constant energy. You have to monitor your words before they emerge, soften reactions that feel too large, amplify enthusiasm you don't feel, suppress the fatigue and doubt beneath the surface. Every one of these micro adjustments, happening hundreds of times a day, has a physiological cost. It maintains a low level of stress activation that never fully switches off. And stress sustained long enough does something specific to the face and body. It ages them, because the stress response was never designed to be permanently on. It is designed for acute threat, a short burst, Then, recovery. When it becomes a baseline state, a permanent low hum beneath ordinary life, the body shows the wear. Not all at once, but year by year, in increments that add up to a face that looks tired in ways sleep no longer fixes. The spiritually awakened person has at some point put down the performance, usually through a crisis that made it impossible to maintain, a breaking point where something simply refused to keep pretending. And the moment the pretending stops, the energy it consumed becomes available again. The nervous system receives the signal that the threat has passed, not an external threat, but the internal threat of being known for what you actually are. When that signal lands, when the body believes it is safe to stop bracing, the face changes. Over months, the person looks more present, more open, more alive, less like someone managing an interior situation. Jung observed that this quality is almost impossible to fake. You can appear younger temporarily through interventions, but the aliveness of genuine integration cannot be manufactured because it is not about the surface. It is about what the surface is no longer required to contain. But there is another layer to this that goes even deeper, the layer most people miss entirely. It has to do not just with what the awakened person releases, but with what they reclaim. Jung understood that people who had moved through genuine individuation had reclaimed parts of themselves that had been underground for years, sometimes decades. The sensitivity they had been told was weakness, the capacity for joy they had suppressed because it felt unsafe to need good things, the creativity they had abandoned when survival became more urgent than self-expression, the anger they had been taught to feel ashamed of, which was actually the healthy signal that their boundaries were being violated. These qualities, when they have been underground for years, are not dead. They are dormant. And when the awakening process brings them back into consciousness, the person doesn't just feel more whole psychologically. They look more whole physically. Because these qualities carry energy, real biological energy. The kind that shows up in the eyes as brightness, in movement as ease, in the face as a quality of presence that communicates without words that someone is genuinely here. Most people by middle age have suppressed enough of their authentic self that a significant portion of their vital energy is perpetually consumed by the act of suppression itself. The awakened person has stopped suppressing. All that energy, previously tied up in maintaining what Jung called the false self, becomes available for actual living. And actual living, as opposed to the management and performance of living, looks completely different from the outside. You know this intuitively. You have been in rooms with people whose vitality is somehow contagious, who seem to have reserves of energy that don't make logical sense for their age. And you have been in rooms with people who drain the air around them, who seem exhausted at a level that has nothing to do with sleep. Jung's insight was that the difference is almost never about what has happened to these people. It is almost always about what they are still carrying or have finally put down. There is a third dimension to this that Jung documented in his later work, and it is perhaps the most counterintuitive of all. It concerns the relationship between spiritual awakening and time. Most people have a relationship with time they are not consciously aware of. They live psychologically across all of it at once. They carry the unresolved grief from 20 years ago as if it is present. They carry anticipatory anxiety about futures that may never arrive, as if those futures are already here. They carry resentments that are decades old in their nervous systems, as if the original wound was inflicted this morning. This time scattering is exhausting in a way that accumulates physically because the nervous system cannot distinguish between a threat happening now and a threat being vividly re-experienced through memory. Every time the unresolved past is activated, the body responds as if the event is occurring again. Every time the feared future is rehearsed in vivid detail, the body generates the stress chemistry of an event that hasn't happened yet. And across years of this, the body ages in ways that have very little to do with chronological time. the spiritually awakened person, through genuine inner work, has developed a relationship with time that looks almost nothing like this. Not because they have escaped their past or stopped caring about the future, but because they have learned through repeated practice and hard experience to return to the present moment, to this breath, this room, this body, right now. Jung observed that the people who had moved through individuation had developed what he called a stable center, a place within themselves from which they could observe both past and future without being consumed by either. This stable center is not a mystical concept. It has real neurobiological correlates. When a person is consistently able to return to present moment experience rather than being pulled into psychological time travel, the baseline stress drops, the quality of sleep changes, the physiological markers of aging slow in measurable ways, and the face reflects it. A person who lives primarily in the present looks different from a person living simultaneously in 3 different time zones of psychological experience. People describe this without quite being able to articulate it. They say the awakened person seems very still inside, very here, as if not distracted by something internal the way most people are. They are right. And that stillness is physiologically younger than the chronic internal distraction most people live in by default. If you're noticing something like this in the people around you, you're already further along than most people ever get. Leave a comment with the word present if this is landing. Jung also documented something about how spiritually awakened people relate to their own emotions, and it is almost the opposite of what popular culture suggests emotional health looks like. Most people either suppress their emotions, pushing them underground, or are overwhelmed by them, swept away in feelings that seem to have no edges. The awakened person has developed something different, the ability to feel fully without being destroyed by feeling. This sounds small. It is not. When you can feel grief completely, let it move through you in its full weight without needing to stop it or escape it, the grief completes itself. Jung called this the natural arc of emotion. Every emotion, if allowed to move without interruption, has a beginning, a peak, and a resolution. Not a pleasant resolution necessarily, but a completion. And completion releases the energy that was being held in the unfinished feeling. Most people never experience emotional completion. They interrupt their emotions because the full experience feels too threatening. They suppress before the feeling can build, manage when it peaks, distract before it can resolve. And so the emotion doesn't complete. It stays in the system, partly activated, pulling on resources indefinitely. The awakened person has learned, often through suffering that made suppression impossible, to let the arc complete. And the body that regularly completes its emotional cycles is not chronically storing unfinished experiences. It is a body that releases. And bodies that release consistently look and function differently from bodies that accumulate. The face that has learned to feel fully is softer than the face that has learned to contain. The eyes that have cried when crying was needed are clearer than the eyes that have held everything in reserve. The breath that has expanded in grief and contracted in fear and deepened in genuine joy is a breath that is moved. And breath that is moved keeps the body younger in ways that cannot be replicated by any intervention that doesn't address the underlying suppression. But there is one more dimension to this that Jung explored in his work on meaning, and this may be the most powerful of all. He observed that the people who aged most visibly, who looked years older than their age by midlife, were often not the people who had experienced the most hardship. They were the people living without a sense of genuine meaning, who had constructed lives that were externally coherent but internally hollow, who had accumulated the things society defined as success without ever asking whether those things corresponded to who they were. Jung believed the deepest source of vitality in a human being was not physical, It was the experience of living in genuine alignment with one's authentic nature. He called this living from the self, with a capital S, as distinct from the ego-constructed version of identity most people inhabit. When a person lives from the self, genuinely expressing what they are, rather than performing what they believe will be accepted, the entire system operates differently. There is no internal friction consuming energy. There is no gap between who you are and who you are pretending to be. The energy that would have maintained that gap becomes available for everything else, including repair, including regeneration, including the basic biological processes that operate differently in a body not chronically managing an internal contradiction. Jung observed that awakened patients who had moved into genuine alignment, who had found work that expressed rather than suppressed what they were, who had released relationships that required them to be less than they were, who had stopped pursuing goals someone else decided were appropriate for them, carried a vitality almost inexplicable from the outside. They had often simplified their lives dramatically, removed enormous amounts of what they had been chasing, and yet they seemed more alive than before, not despite the simplification, because of it. Because living simply in alignment is metabolically different from living elaborately in contradiction. The face that is not performing relaxes. The body that is not bracing settles. The nervous system that is not maintaining a split between inner reality and outer presentation finally gets to function as it was designed to. And all of that registers in a way other people perceive as youth, without being able to explain what they are seeing, because they are not seeing a technique. They are seeing the absence of an enormous invisible effort. The effort of not being what you actually are. What you are beginning to understand now is why this is not primarily about spiritual practices or rituals or anything external. It is about the internal work of becoming honest with yourself at a depth most people never attempt. Jung's contribution to understanding human aging was not a health protocol. It was a psychological one. He observed that we age prematurely not because biology is cruel, but because most of us spend enormous portions of our lives in states of suppression, performance, self-abandonment, and inauthenticity that generate physiological stress on a timeline chronological time alone would never produce. And the reversal of this, a genuine awakening that reclaims what was suppressed and allows the person to live from their actual nature, doesn't just change how the person feels. It changes how the person looks, the face, the posture, the quality of movement and presence, in ways immediately apparent to everyone around them and impossible to explain through conventional understandings of aging. The person who has done this work doesn't stop time. They stop contributing to their own premature aging through the ongoing accumulation of what they were never designed to carry. There is a final observation worth making, because it completes the picture in a way that is both unsettling and, if you are ready to hear it, genuinely freeing. The spiritually awakened person who looks younger has not discovered a shortcut. They have not avoided suffering. In almost every case, they have moved through more difficulty than the average person, not less, felt things more fully, lost more completely, then broken open in ways most people successfully avoid for an entire lifetime. The reason they carry less of it in their face is not that less happened to them. It is that they processed what happened rather than storing it. They completed their grief rather than containing it. They integrated their shadow rather than maintaining the exhausting effort of keeping it invisible. They stopped performing their life and began actually living it, often at enormous social cost. And on the other side of that, they arrived somewhere. Not into ease or comfort necessarily, but into authenticity, into alignment, into a relationship with their own existence that generates vitality from within rather than consuming it. The eyes of a person who has stopped lying to themselves are different from the eyes of a person who hasn't. Not because the awakened person has become more evolved in any hierarchical sense, simply because the work of self-deception costs something, and the cessation of that work returns something visible. The body of a person who is no longer at war with themselves. The face of a person who has stopped holding the world at bay with the effort of not being what they are. You are not here by accident. Something in you already knows this is true. Perhaps you have glimpsed it in yourself, in a moment when something released that you had been holding for years, and for a brief time, you caught your own reflection and did not recognize how different you looked. That was real. That was your system showing you what becomes possible when the weight is put down. The path is not comfortable, but the arrival looks very different from the outside than most people expect. Not mystical, not transcendent in any dramatic sense, just quietly, unmistakably more alive. If this reached something in you, share it with someone who needs to hear it and subscribe to keep going deeper. Because that aliveness shows in the only mirror that doesn't lie. The one visible to everyone around you before it is ever visible to you.